everybody, Jeff Marion again. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Last week we discussed the opioid crisis and how we got to the point that lawsuits were filed all over the country. So this week we're going to talk about the theories of liability and who the main parties are that filed those lawsuits and why you don't hear a lot about individual cases and individual personal injury claims. So this is a series of videos that are designed to not only help you navigate the complex field of personal injury law. This is a series of videos that will help you navigate personal injury law. You can subscribe to this channel by clicking on my logo in the corner. And you can also go to my website, www.jeffmarionlaw.com, for free PDFs on vaccine safety and the myths surrounding the COVID-19 vaccine. In case you're wondering who I am, I've been fighting for people who've been injured in crashes, in falls, and by unsafe products for over 25 years. I filed the first lawsuit against the manufacturers and distributors of opioid pain medication by a town in New York State. I am also a member of the American Association for Justice's Opioids Litigation Group, where I serve as one of the co-chairs. And that litigation group is comprised of most of the plaintiffs' lawyers who are trying these cases in court as we speak. So last week we talked about how we got to a point where opioid pain medication became the go-to painkiller and prescribed pain medication by doctors all around the country, how it became so easily accessible, and how an addiction crisis spiraled out of control because of the availability of cheap heroin that the cartels made very accessible to its customers. Well, what happened as a result is that these municipalities started to see their costs increase, whether those were jail costs, costs for medical insurance, law enforcement costs. They saw the massive amount of overdoses that were overwhelming their system. So the very first cases came out of West Virginia. And what they came up with was a theory called public nuisance. And this is a common tort in civil law. A public nuisance basically says that your dangerous product or your acts have created a cost and a nuisance to the public at large. Now, the way this is framed is that the taxpayers of a given municipality or a state or a county or whatever have to pay extra costs for jails, for therapeutic courts, for morgues, for programs, their family court systems because the children are taken away from the parents who are addicted and trying to find placement for those kids. All of that has overwhelmed our budget to the point that we can't do other things, and we have to concentrate our resources into trying to basically tread water, let alone resolve this problem or stop it from happening. So let's talk about who filed these cases and what entities started to file on this theory of public nuisance. You have the states, obviously. We've all seen state attorneys general be very active in these cases. You see counties that are very active. Also, larger cities and towns, such as the one I live in, Amherst, New York, have filed their own cases. You'll also see Native American tribes have filed their cases. Hospitals have filed as well. And they've all filed under this theory of public nuisance. This is the main theory. Now, there is also fraud. There is also unfair business practices and false advertising. That varies from state to state depending on that state's particular law regarding unfair business practices or unfair trade or false advertising. But those were other causes of action that were filed by virtually every municipality in the United States. You'll also see action in other countries that have gotten involved in this litigation. So who are the main defendants in this? Well, we can put them in three categories. Okay, the first category is going to be your manufacturers of this pain medication. We talked about Purdue Pharmaceutical in particular, but you've seen Johnson & Johnson, Endo, other large companies that have been involved. The second is the distributors. If you remember, we talked about them last week. It's not simply that the doctor's office or the pharmacy or the hospital calls up their representative from Purdue or any of these other companies and places an order, and then it's sent directly from that manufacturer. There are distributors in this chain, and these distributors have basically what amounts to a golden ticket from the Drug Enforcement Agency. Again, a callback to last week. Not only is the Drug Enforcement Agency out arresting drug dealers, but they have a regulatory arm as well. These distributors had to red flag suspicious transactions. Again, where the famous pill mills, where hundreds of thousands or millions of pills were being sent to these pharmacies in small towns, where they basically exceed the entire population, or the entire population of that town would be able to get a year or two's worth of prescriptions, maybe even sometimes 5 times over that. So you've got those two. Now the third group were key opinion leaders, and these were scientists, medical doctors, who were paid by these companies, these manufacturers especially, to create papers and to do lectures on how opioids weren't addictive, and that if you as a doctor prescribe them, you're able to manage it so that your patients can't possibly be addictive. This, obviously, as we talked about last week, and you can watch that video, took the entire science of opioids and stood it on its head. Everybody knew that opioids were addictive and dangerous, but this whole body of science was created out of whole cloth to say that opioids, if given by prescription, were not addictive. If taken under a doctor's care, not addictive. All of this was false. Now, since all of that, pharmacies have been added. There's also a large consulting firm that has been added as a defendant in some of these lawsuits. But that's the main players. What you're really seeing here is municipalities and governments versus manufacturers, distributors, and key opinion leaders. So were these suits happening in all 50 states? Not necessarily. For the most part, they were consolidated in what's known as multi-district litigation. Most of the cases were consolidated in Ohio, in the Northern District of Ohio in Cleveland, another ground zero for this opioid crisis. New York State, where I reside, it was a little different because Purdue Pharmaceutical, one of the major players, is a New York company with a base in New York City. So those cases were actually filed in state court, and there are other state court cases around the country. There's Pennsylvania, there's, I believe, still a West Virginia case, but other states do have cases in state court. You obviously saw last year, you may have heard about Oklahoma getting a large verdict against some of the manufacturers of opioids. That was a state case. Okay, so we're talking about all of these thousands of defendants. Why haven't you talked about individuals, personal injury cases from people who got addicted, or from families who lost a loved one? Well, the lawyers who started to take on these cases did a very smart thing right from the off. And what they did is they had focus groups. And what they basically did is ran mock juries, mock trials, and tried to see how these jurors would react to an individual personal injury case. And I can tell you that the results were not good. Jurors often had a problem or couldn't get past the plaintiff's own behavior, or they generally shifted it to the bad doctor and away from these manufacturers and distributors. So you don't see any personal injury cases. There are some natal cases out there, but they're not as prevalent as the municipalities, the tribes, those sorts of cases. In a video we'll put out next week, we're going to talk about a big monkey wrench in the works, and that's because the largest player in all of this, Purdue Pharmaceutical, filed for bankruptcy. When a defendant in a personal injury case files for bankruptcy, that stays any lawsuits that have been brought against them. This also happens in personal bankruptcy. For example, if someone is having his or her house foreclosed upon, or is being sued by a company that believes that person owes them money, the filing of the bankruptcy stops all that, basically puts it all on pause. So what we ended up with is the largest bankruptcy probably in the history of the United States. The claims against Purdue Pharmaceutical, when you put them all together, are staggering. And the judge in that bankruptcy case opened the door for individual claims, which also brought the number up and made the case a little more difficult to settle. Also complicating this is that the Sackler family also filed for bankruptcy. As you remember, this is not a corporation, Purdue Pharmaceutical, it's a privately held company. So they wanted protection so that their individual assets couldn't be taken in a judgment. So we're going to get into that bankruptcy next week and how it may have affected you. Now, if you or someone you know has been injured in a crash, in a fall, or by an unsafe product such as a dangerous drug, please email me at the address below. You can also contact me via my Facebook page, www.facebook.com/JeffMarionLaw, and I'll sit down with you for free and go over your case with you. So if you like this video or the series of videos, please leave your comments below, hit that like button, and subscribe to this channel. Until next time, when we talk about bankruptcy of Purdue Pharmaceutical, have a great week and we'll see you.